Yelan is a brand new Hydro Bow user coming to us here in Genshin Impact 2.7, and she is an incredible character. She's a very strong Hydro sub DPS that does amazing Hydro application and is for all intents and purposes a 5-star Xingqiu, however with some slightly varying uses, and she has a little bit of a skill cap, which I always appreciate on a character. Hi, my name is Blossums and welcome to another Genshin Impact video, and today we're going to be going over our Yelan build, some of the best weapons you can be looking for on her, as well as some of the best artifacts, different team pairings, etc. And we've got plenty to cover, but before we do, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this type of content, as it helps me out a ton and I really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's go over Yelan. First off, we need to know a little bit about Yelan's kit. I did say she's basically 5-star Xingqiu, and this remains true. A lot of her focus is going to be on her elemental burst, which works a lot like Xingqiu's. You cast it, and then whenever you do a normal attack, it is going to deal 3 instances of AoE hydro damage, and it's going to deal solid damage. And this scales off of HP, which is very unique and very scalable, so you can make it deal some very considerable damage. Not to mention that it has a duration of 15 seconds and a cooldown of 18 seconds and an energy cost of 70, meaning you only have a 3-second downtime, and the energy cost really isn't all that bad. She does have some energy issues, but we will talk about that as we go over. But yeah, a lot of what you're going to be using her for is likely going to be from her elemental burst and applying hydro off of the field for characters to create proper elemental reaction. This does have an initial skill hit, and then you can see it scales differently for the different 3 instances of hydro damage, and this will also proc on her E skill, which we'll go over right now. Her E skill is essentially a dash, and you can either tap or hold it, and she dashes forward and she turns herself invisible with a little string, and she marks all of her opponents, and when she does and she releases on the hold function, or you just tap and you're done, it deals hydro damage that is also based off of her HP. So you can see this is going to be a very HP centered character, and you're definitely going to want some HP on her. However, you will note that the cooldown on this is 10 seconds, meaning that it doesn't do an incredible job of generating her elemental burst, but it isn't bad either. Just know you are going to need to also care about your energy recharge pretty deeply for Yelan. Now, there is another part about this, and you might notice this line where it says, additionally, each opponent marked by the lifeline when it explodes grants Yelan a 34% chance to reset her breakthrough state. You might be wondering what that means. Well, she has something called the breakthrough state, and whenever she is out of combat for 5 seconds, she will enter a breakthrough state, which will cause her next charge aim shot to have an 80% decreased charge time, and once charged, she will fire a breakthrough barb that will deal AoE hydro damage based off of her max HP. So that's right, she has a charge attack that is very fast that also scales off of max HP, which is really strong, and you can really set it up to deal some really solid damage with the proper reactions, but it works off of her being off of the field for a while or resetting it via her E skill. And as I mentioned previously before, the elemental burst, some of its procs on the exquisite throw can occur off of Yelan's lifeline on the E skill. So just keep that in mind. These all work together. So all of these talents are going to be important. Namely, her E skill and her elemental burst are of course going to be the most important for those of you scrounging for some books. But in the end, I think leveling them all up to max is going to be worth it. Because the really big difference between a good Yelan player and a bad Yelan player is going to be how much you are going to be using this charge shot, because this charge shot does deal some solid damage and it's very fast. So if you can take advantage of that and deal that extra damage, that is going to be spiking up your damage from Yelan pretty considerably, and it's really solid. Of course, you don't have to. She's still an amazing unit without doing so, but taking advantage of that is really strong, and I highly recommend you try to get used to it. But other than her core kit, she does have some passives that are very relevant, and namely this one where when the party has 1, 2, 3, 4 elemental types, Yelan's max HP is increased by 6, 12, 18, and 30%. So yeah, you get free HP percent on her just for using a varied team, which is a very easy thing to do and is quite awesome. I think this is really cool, and I like the way that it influences you to build a very diverse team. And since a lot of us are likely going to be taking advantage of one elemental resonance, you're likely going to be hitting the 18% version of this. But if you are doing a rainbow team of all different elements, 30% is a really good bump, and I'd say that is pretty worth it. Next up, she has another passive, and this is a really huge one that differentiates her from Xingqiu, where so long as Exquisite Throw is in play, your own active character deals 1% more damage. This increases by a further 3.5 damage every second. The maximum increase to damage dealt is 50%. The pre-existing effect will be dispelled if Depth Clarion Dice is recast during its duration, meaning the elemental burst. And so yeah, she just allows the character that's on the field to be dealing extra damage for free, and you are likely going to be setting up elemental reactions with her elemental burst, meaning that your elemental reactions are just going to be dealing that much more damage for free, which is absolutely incredible. And as I said, the only real bottleneck to Yelan's kit is the fact that she can't generate a ton of energy very easily. You can mitigate this in a myriad of ways though, so it's really not that big of a detriment. And overall, her kit is very, very strong and much more leaning into that sub DPS category, especially with some of the aspects to her, like the charge shot activating by being out of combat for a little bit, and of course her elemental burst working on your other characters and adding damage to them. By the way, this damage bonus does apply to her as well, so if you want to make her a main DPS, you certainly can, but her kit is definitely more tailored towards enhancing other units. And for the last passive, it is simply you get 25% more rewards and for leeway expeditions for 20 hours, which is nice. That's a pretty solid one. That's likely what you're going to be doing anyway, so why not get more rewards? It's just kind of a win-win at that point, and overall is a solid pick. So two of the important things we noted while going over Yelan is the fact that she is, one, definitely going to want some HP percent because everything scales off of HP, and two, that she's definitely going to want some energy recharge because of the fact that she has a relatively high cost burst and her E skill has a pretty long cooldown. And also the fact that her elemental burst is going to be a core part of her kit in enhancing your other units, meaning that the Emblem of Severed Fate is without a doubt just going to be the best pick for Yelan. It gives her energy recharge, it increases the damage you do on your elemental burst, mitigating some of the need to build into your energy recharge, as well as providing even more damage than she was already doing. Is really fantastic. This is an incredible version for her, and typically the numbers you're shooting for her energy recharge means that you're going to be getting anywhere from like a 30 to 40 or so % increase on your elemental burst damage from Emblem of Severed Fate. So yeah, this is an incredible 4-piece for her, and is honestly my pick for her. If you're going for any 4-piece, I'd suggest you go for this one. However, I will say you do have some other options. I don't think a lot of these other options are nearly as good as the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, so I'm really trying to sell you on this one here, but in the end, a lot of the time your substats are going to matter way more than your set bonus, and if that's the case for you, you don't have a good Emblem of Severed Fate, you can do some split sets, and you have plenty to choose from as well. Namely, of course, a split set of the Emblem of Severed Fate is fine, and pairing that with something like the Tenacity of the Millith is also fine, increasing your HP by an additional 20%, so if you have good pieces on those, that's a really solid option. I, however, would not recommend some of these attack pieces like you might normally go for when you're doing split sets, because as we noted before, remember that all of her damage basically scales off of max HP. She does have some stuff that scales off attack, but her E skill and her elemental burst and her charge shot thing that she has going on, the breakthrough there, all scales off of max HP. So remember that attack isn't going to be nearly as important on her, so leaning towards something like Hydro damage bonus might yield better results for you. Of course, if you're going for a main DPS Yelan as well, just as a quick side note here, Heart of Depth here in the 4-piece is a pretty solid option if you want to do a lot of normal attacking with Yelan. I don't recommend that, nor do I think it's optimal, but if it is a build that you would like to go for, then I would probably recommend this. Of course, stuff like the Wondrous Troop is pretty nice for elemental mastery, especially if you're going for something like Electro Charge, meaning that some of your reactions are just going to be dealing that much more damage, which is nice. But other than that, yeah, Heart of Depth, the Tenacity of the Millith, and the Emblem of Severed Fate are all going to be some of the best picks for you for Yelan. You do have some of these other options like I mentioned before, but realistically, you do want to shoot for a 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate if possible. Main stats for Yelan are also pretty simple, and you actually have a little bit of choice here. The way I'm going to be doing my build is going to be HP percent on the Sands, Hydro damage bonus on the Goblet, and then crit rate circlet. Now, you do have some options. As I mentioned before, all of this scales off of HP percent, so yeah, you can just go full HP if you really want to, or if you have really good substats on full HP, that's going to be an entirely viable option for you and does really solid results. Now, also, if you just can't get good energy recharge, then something like an energy recharge Sands is also going to be an option for you, and then at that point I would recommend HP on the Goblet and then maybe HP or crit rate on the circlet there if you need that additional energy recharge. The numbers for your energy recharge that you're going to want to shoot for, in my opinion, I think you're going to want at least 180 to feel a bit comfortable, and even at that point you're still going to have to make sure you are getting that E skill off of cooldown as much as you can to make sure you're getting proper particles, and also keeping her on the field to catch those particles to make sure they're going to her elemental burst properly is going to be important. If you want to be very comfy, I'd say the 200% or so range. Even higher is going to yield you really good results for not having to worry about all of what I just mentioned. But yeah, ER HP percent on the Sands is fine, HP or Hydro damage bonus on the Goblet is great, and then crit rate, crit damage, or HP percent on the circlet are all going to be the main choices that you want to go for your main stats on Yelan. You're just going to have to adjust it accordingly to the weapon that you pick, as well as the substats that you have provided to you. And speaking of substats, the ones that you're obviously going to want to be looking for as much as possible are going to be energy recharge, HP percent, crit rate, and crit damage, and then elemental mastery as the least important one out of the ones I just mentioned. Crit rate and crit damage are of course always fantastic, especially for a good sub DPS unit like this. Energy recharge is going to help alleviate some of those energy recharge issues that we've mentioned before, and of course HP percent is just going to be adding more to your damage because everything scales off of HP. So those are the core things you want to look for. Ideally, something with crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and HP percent is going to be the best kind of artifact for her. In this case, something like my Sands here is a perfect Yelan artifact. Good crit rate, good crit damage, a little bit of energy recharge, a little bit of elemental mastery on an HP percent Sands is fantastic. This is pretty much what you want to look for, and those are the substats you want to look for, and go for those as much as possible. Before we move on to weapons, I'll go ahead and go over each and every one of the artifacts I have equipped on my Yelan so you know where I got my stats from and the general feel of the artifact roles you might need on your artifacts to accomplish a similar stat distribution. When it comes to weapons for Yelan, you've actually got plenty of options. In the 5-star category alone, you've got a couple options, and I think there are 2 realistic options that I think are kind of the best of the best for 5-star options, those being the Elegy of the End and of course her signature weapon that came out alongside of her. Those are both going to be the top picks in the 5-star category. There are of course a couple of other picks like things that generally increase your energy recharge or your crit rate or crit damage are going to be good options, but I think those are the 2 best 5-star options between the energy recharge options and of course the crit rate or crit damage options. Those are going to be the cream of the crop there, but most of us don't have those 5-star options. So what are we going to be looking at? Well, you'll be happy to know you have just as many options in the 4-star category and plenty of 4-star options actually. One of the best ones is definitely going to be the Favonius Warbow due to its high energy recharge stat and its passive being able to generate some extra particles. This is a phenomenal weapon on Yelan, and for the most part a lot of us are likely going to be using this one because it gives so much energy recharge and helps get her burst back much more consistently than a lot of the other options. However, if your Favonius Warbow is dedicated to somebody else, fear not, you can still utilize some other options, namely the Fading Twilight is something a lot of people are looking at because it is a brand new weapon and a lot of people have a lot of questions about it. It has some energy recharge, it increases your damage. It seems pretty well made for Yelan, and it is. It's a pretty solid option on her. It's not super incredible or anything. I think the Favonius Warbow is a better option, especially for that energy generation, but say you've got really cracked energy recharge substats, then you might want to consider the Fading Twilight because this has higher base attack attack, it increases your damage in its passive, and if you're meeting that energy recharge requirement very easily with your artifacts already, and you don't need huge energy recharge substats, then the Fading Twilight might be a really good option for you. You also have other options like the Stringless, which is fantastic for your elemental skill and burst damage and some elemental mastery there. The Sacrificial Bow is not a terrible option. It also helps recharge your elemental skill, which is pretty cool and nice, and it has that same base attack and energy recharge value as the Fading Twilight. So if you just have a high refinement Sacrificial Bow, that might be something you want to go for. And if you're going for a main DPS in Yelan, where she's the one doing the majority of the damage, this is something you might want to consider as well, just because this is going to allow you to do more E skills, meaning that your damage output will be higher. So that is something you want to take into consideration as well. Things like the Viridescent Hunt aren't awful, especially if you really need the crit rate. But as I said, I do think the energy recharge options that we've showed before are all going to be better picks before something like the crit rate options here. And the Stringless here is a really good option as well. But if you aren't meeting those ER requirements, then it's really not that worth it. But if you have really strong energy recharge without a weapon, then the Stringless is going to be a phenomenal option. However, the options don't stop at just what I have available to me. As I mentioned before, a lot of the 5-star options are going to be fantastic for her and are going to work. But there are some other 4-star options that I don't have, like Moon's Moon here and Alley Hunter, that are actually solid options for her. I still do think things like the Favonius Warbow are inevitably going to be better in the long run, but Moon's Moon and Alley Hunter are both really strong options. And if you are looking for a low investment option, the 3-star recurve bow is really good for her as well. I actually don't have this 3-star option. Funny enough, I need to make sure to get a hold of one next time I notice it is in my inventory, but this has an HP percent substat, which no other bow does in the game. So this has an HP percent substat, gives you some extra HP. So if you have plenty of energy recharge or something, or maybe you're using an energy recharge main piece, this might be something to consider, especially if you don't have any of the other 4-star options and you're just looking for a good low investment option. As I mentioned before, team comps for Yelan are very flexible, and a good rule of thumb for your mental notes there is that any team that Xingqiu would fit in, Yelan can fit in as well. There are of course scenarios where you're going to want Xingqiu's damage reduction and his little bit of healing over somebody like Yelan, but if you're just looking for off-field Hydro support, she fills that exact same role and allows your team to deal a little bit extra damage on the main DPS because of some of her passives, so that's pretty nice as well. It's really all just going to come down to what you need for that specific team, but I did want to briefly mention not to discount the idea of putting them together, because putting them together is actually really nice. And if you do something like, oh, I don't know, like Yoimiya and like Zhongli or something, this is actually a really good team. Your Hydro application is off the charts, and you're basically dealing double the amount of Hydro damage that you would be normally with Xingqiu, because their damage actually is pretty same. It's very similar, and your Hydro application just goes nuts. It allows you to guarantee you're vaporizing things instead of maybe missing a vaporize or two. Just being able to get that really strong single target damage is very good, and this isn't limited to like a vaporize or something. If you just wanted to do some sort of freeze comp, or if you wanted to do some sort of electro charge, these two together are very strong, and they're definitely an option you have. And there's going to be some more options that we'll talk about in a second, but I did want to point out the fact that if you have some constellations on Xingqiu, remember he decreases Hydro resistance on opponents for his C2 there. So if you have something like that, then pairing these two together is something that you'll want to consider even further. And as I mentioned before, pretty much any team that Xingqiu would fit in, Yelan is going to fit in there as well. So some variant of the national team is of course going to work. You could add like somebody like Kazuha here, have Bennett Xiangling, and then Yelan BR Hydro Applier. This is going to work well. Another team that I've been seeing making the rounds is actually a Xingqiu and Yelan team along with Bennett and Xiangling. This allows you to vaporize just as consistently as you normally would with somebody like Bennett, Xiangling, and Xingqiu, but having Yelan there for the extra Hydro application allows you to maybe swap to Bennett and get some additional vaporizes on his E skill. So if you like main DPS, Bennett or something, that might be something you want to consider as well. When it comes to freeze teams, though, I don't think Yelan is going to be the pick for you. You can definitely make it work, and that's fine, but remember, Yelan is going to specialize more in single target damage rather than an AoE of freezing opponents, and if you're just worried about single target freezing, well, I mean, that's fine, and she's going to work for that, but if you do want to do a freeze comp of some kind, you're definitely going to want to pair her with somebody who has good AoE Hydro. Somebody like Ayato would be a good pick, or somebody like Kokomi, who can do it in a little bit of an area, would be strong choices to pair with Yelan to just make sure your Hydro application is on point. But I will say she's really strong in a pairing with Eula. Eula and Yelan are actually really fun together because of course you're going to be normal attacking a ton with Eula and then getting that Hydro application, getting an occasional freeze with Eula's E skill to then shatter, and then of course you'll be constantly getting your super conducts and maybe a little bit of electro charge alongside of that if you're doing some sort of superconduct team with Yelan there. That's actually pretty nice, and I think that's a pretty good pairing. Of course, you could do something like the Raiden Shogun there, and then that way you have good Hydro application. You're getting some electro charge for free on the side of Raiden Shogun while you're doing your normal attacks. You're getting the occasional freeze slash shatter slash superconduct and Raiden Shogun's elemental burst while you're popping off and dealing damage with her. Yelan's elemental burst can proc off of that, just like Xingqiu. So I really do like these three together. They're pretty strong, and yeah, there's plenty of pairings. As I said, she's extremely flexible, but there is one more I want to mention that you guys need to look out for that you can't quite do right now. One team that I'm extremely looking forward to is going to be some variant of Pyro DPS. Could be Yoimiya, could be Yanfei, could be Hu Tao, Yelan, and then a flex slot here. This could be Geo, Animo, or it could even be in another Electro unit, and then Kuki Shinobu. Kuki Shinobu is going to unlock a lot of teams. I'm actually probably going to be making a video talking about that, but Kuki is going to be unlocking a ton of teams, and this is going to allow you to get your usual Vaporize going on and the occasional Over Vape with the Electro application of an Electro healer. Now, of course, you could do something like just having like another Electro unit and then maybe like an Animo healer here, but we don't have any Animo shielders, and when you're trying to use a DPS like Yoimiya, you typically want a shielder of some kind to make sure she isn't getting waxed while she's stuck in her normal attack animation. So I think an Electro healer is really going to unlock some of the potential for characters like Yoimiya that are kind of stuck in a position, and then being able to have that shielder like Zhongli where you can take that hit and then have something like your Electro healer left over to make sure everybody's staying alive. And I'm really looking forward to that, and I just wanted to point that out to people who also may or may not be looking forward to it. All right, and that's the build. Those are the weapons. Those are some of the team comps, but my stats for Yelan end up as such. I have 28k when I have 3 different party members. We're near 1200 attack, 116 elemental mastery. Our energy recharge is at 198 with a crit rate of 77 and crit damage of 146. Hydro damage bonus of 46.6. These are all pretty solid stats all around, I'd say. The only thing I want to increase here really is probably a little bit more crit damage, and of course maybe a little bit of extra energy recharge if I can find it somewhere. But I think this is a very solid stat distribution, not to mention the bonuses I'll be getting from LGDN puts my elemental mastery in a really nice place. So this is all around a really good build, and if you're wondering where I got my stats or how they ended up, this is how they ended up. Just as a general reminder, I have my Yelan currently at all level 7 talents here, so just for reference there, in the showcase that we're going to be doing, we're going to be showing off some floor 12 Spiral Abyss gameplay, so hope you guys enjoy that, and then we'll come back around for some of the conclusions that I have on Yelan. Well, that's going to be about it for the video, and I've got to say, Yelan is absolutely fantastic. I really love her kit. She's super fun to play, fitting in those charge attacks where you can. It just really speaks to me. I really like her E skill and all, and I've been looking for a Xingqiu alternative for a very long time, and she certainly doesn't disappoint. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hopefully this helped you out, helped you build your Yelan properly, gave you some good team comp ideas, etc, etc. I'd like to see all of that in the comments below. But other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. My name is Blossoms, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.